One of the hardest parts of any project is getting started. It doesn't matter if it's building a boat or editing a video. There's always a bit of inertia that must be overcome before I get myself motivated to start. But even worse is restarting. Hitting a glitch in the middle of a project that causes you to step back and take a break can result in a big delay or even a situation where you never get back to it. I find I work best when I concentrate on one project and keep at it until done. I'm not good at multitasking. I like to focus and maintain momentum. Narrating the voiceover for a build I did a couple years ago while trying to build a couple other boats throws me off. But I'm doing my best to keep it together. Hi, I'm Nick Schade. Welcome back to the Guillemot Kayaks Workshop. In this episode, I'm building my solo microBootlegger design. This is a commission I received from a client out on the West Coast. Their dad had recently passed away, leaving them with a bit of money, and they decided to use it to create something to remember him by. The Solo microBootlegger is a stable 14-foot long recreational kayak that is comfortable and relaxing to paddle. It's stable, has a roomy cockpit, and moves along easily at a moderate pace. It's good for anyone looking to go out in the harbor, bay, or lake. In choosing to have me build this kayak, the client had to make some choices about how high a level of finish they wanted for their kayak. They wanted a kayak they could paddle. Their budget was limited, but large enough they could afford a custom-made kayak. They wanted a beautiful reminder of their dad, but not something to just hang on the wall. In other words, they wanted an artistic kayak, not kayak-shaped art. The Solo microBootlegger is a strip-built design. Strip building creates a beautiful boat from thin pieces of solid wood bent around forms. I choose to use Western red cedar due to its gorgeous color, good strength, and lightweight properties. It also reflects the natural environment where my client will use the kayak. If you watch some of my previous builds, you may have seen me book match. Book matching involves keeping the strips in the order they came off the original board and putting consecutive strips on either side of the boat, creating a repeating mirrored pattern. I'm not doing that. Book matching requires particularly careful work, and as such adds quite a bit of time to the construction. While book matching looks nice, the Western red cedar is beautiful even without that added effort. Speaking of balancing aesthetics with practicality, you'll notice I'm using staples to temporarily hold the strips of the forms while the glue dries. Again, you may have seen me build boats where I didn't use staples because I didn't want the little staple holes, but this boat's going to be used. It will get scratched up over time. The goal is to make a beautiful boat, not an object so precious it can't be used. By using staples, I save some time making the kayak, save the client some money, and make it easier to feel comfortable subjecting it to a rocky beach landing. I'll do a bit to take the beauty to the next level later, but for basic construction, I'm keeping it simple, affordable, and hopefully elegant. I've said it before, the amount of time you can put into a project like this can be nearly infinite. Every step of the way, there are things I could do to make it more perfect. There's always something that can be upgraded. Everyone endeavoring to make something must decide where the need to be better meets the point of good enough. After a point, the incremental cost of making it better does not justify the slight improvement. The key isn't how you define perfection. There's the platonic ideal of flawlessness where every joint has no gaps, the wood grain is the paragon of matching, and the hull is fared to mathematical precision, etc. But we are creating a kayak that will be used. To the extent the preciousness of the finished product inhibits your willingness to allow it to be scratched, that perfect boat may become perfectly unusable, and thus not even a good boat, let alone perfect. What constitutes perfection in this kayak is, when my client's out on the water, they forget about the boat, but being out there reminds them of their father. I don't want worries about scratching the boat to detract from the pleasure of being there. I want the kayak to enhance the experience. I'm looking to balance beauty with practicality. For instance, I'm using square-edged strips instead of cove and bead. I feel I can get better, tighter-looking joints by carefully beveling each strip to fit the next one. I'm using my RoboBevel tool to make this tight fit. It's taking me about 20 minutes to install one strip here. I could have saved 5 to 10 minutes if I'd used cove and bead strips for pretty good seams between strips, or I could spend another 20 minutes to make the fit even better. I decided that doubling the time once was adequate to be good enough, and that doubling that time again would not have resulted in sufficiently better appearance to justify the time. I could do better, but not enough better to be worth it. My priority is to make sure the kayak meets all the physical requirements of being a safe and reliable boat that performs well on the water. I want to do that in a way that looks great, but once I've achieved the necessary strength and performance, making it look slightly better starts to become less urgent. These kinds of decisions are part of any project. While it may not be specifically whether to use staples or not, there are always choices between doing it absolutely the best way possible versus getting the project done on time and within budget. I'm building this kayak for a client, so if I want to get paid, I'm going to get it done regardless. But working on your own projects at home, one of the biggest risks is you run into some hitch and the project stalls out. What exactly the problem is will vary. Sometimes it's something you broke, or maybe something didn't fit right, or it just doesn't look good. If the project you're trying to do is new to you, or has you outside your comfort zone to begin with, figuring out a path of solution forward can be overwhelming. You may put the project aside until you come up with a plan, and then the whole thing drifts off to the bottom of your project list, and 10 years later you toss the whole project in the chipper. One of your tasks when you're deciding on a project is setting yourself up for success, and that can mean setting reasonable expectations for your project. If you've never built a boat before and you're impressed by what that guy on YouTube made look really easy, it's worth noting that a task that is easy for somebody with experience may not be as easy for a first-time builder. Setting yourself up for success can mean matching your expectations to your experience level. While staple-free construction and that book matching thing may be exactly the look you want to achieve with your first build, each one requires a set of skills that you'll need to learn while building. You'll already be learning a bunch of basic skills that have more immediate impact on the finished look of your boat. Getting the strips fitted together without major gaps is an achievement. But the most impact you'll have on the finished look will be after all the wood is in place and you start fairing and sanding. The book matching I'm doing here on the back deck, installed without staples, won't look good if I don't follow through. I still need to get a clean and smooth layer of fiberglass and epoxy on that wood, fill the weave with a bit more epoxy, and sand and fair that surface and apply varnish, each of which takes practice to do well. A good finish will make the wood look spectacular, even if your woodworking skills need work. But regardless of how good a job you do with the finish work, chances are excellent that the boat will float even if it didn't match your expectations during the build. If you allow yourself to become discouraged as you work on the project, you run the risk of not finishing it. Remember, nobody ever learned anything by doing it right the first time. Making mistakes is expected. Learning from them and improving as you go is integral to the project. The struggles you have during the project are what make the project worth doing. If it were easy, everybody would be doing it, and the success wouldn't be much of an accomplishment. I'll tell you right now, your standards are high and you're not going to be completely satisfied. I've been building kayaks for about 40 years now. I've made hundreds of boats. While I've been very happy with a lot of these boats, not one of them has completely fulfilled everything I wanted to accomplish with the build. I'm always left thinking about how I can do it better next time. For those of you watching who aren't familiar with this boat building project, I suppose I owe you some sort of explanation. As mentioned before, I'm making a strip-built kayak. What you have watched me doing so far is take a bunch of thin, narrow strips of western red cedar and assemble them around a form. The strips are 3/16 thick, which is about 5 millimeters for those who understand sensible units, and about 3/4 inches wide, 19 millimeters. I've used standard woodworking glue to hold them together. They're temporarily held to the forms with some staples. After pulling the staples, there's nothing else attaching them to the forms. While the wood is still on the forms, I plane and sand the surface smooth and fair, wetting down the surface to help raise the grain before the final sanding. The wood itself is not particularly strong. While it's not weak, it is less than a 1/4 inch thick and as such won't stand up to the aforementioned landing on rocky beaches. This method of boat building gets much of its strength from fiberglass, and fiberglass is exactly what the word says, fibers of glass. I didn't glue the deck and hull together. This allows me to remove the deck and place the hull and deck each on separate strongbacks. I did struggle a bit getting the deck off this time. The longest part of the fiberglassing process is the time it takes the epoxy to cure. epoxy bonds the glass fibers to the wood. By placing the two parts on their own form, I'm able to wet out the fiberglass on both pieces on the same day. This saves several days of the building process. The white fabric is 4-ounce fiberglass. In this form, fiberglass is light and smooth with a silk-like texture. Unlike some fiberglass materials, it does not cause itching when you handle it. It's very flexible and easily conforms to the shape of the kayak. YouTube is full of folks making stuff with epoxy. If you didn't know better, you might think epoxy was invented to make river tables, but in reality it's a kind of glue. It was originally intended to bond things together. In this application, epoxy bonds the fiberglass to the wood. Epoxy by itself is not very strong. Raw fiberglass is flexible and without structure. While wood is pretty strong, it doesn't really like water. Combining them all together, epoxy bonds the fiberglass to the structure of the wood, the fiberglass binds the wood together, and the layer of fiberglass plus epoxy protects the wood from water. The resulting composite material is lightweight and rugged, and because the glass is actually clear like a window, the epoxy makes the glass disappear, so all you see is the wood. After wetting out the fiberglass with a coat of epoxy, the surface of the boat still shows the texture of the fiberglass fabric. After curing for a couple hours, another coat of epoxy starts to fill the weave texture so the natural beauty of the wood shows through. With the epoxy cured on the outside, the deck and hull are now strong enough to remove from the forms. I make another set of cradle forms to hold the pieces while I scrape, sand, and fair the interior. Just like the outside, the inside gets a layer of fabric reinforcement. I include a bit of carbon fiber in the cockpit seating area to add some stiffness and strength. I also just think it looks cool. While the white fiberglass disappears, the carbon fiber starts black and becomes blacker. Once again, the fabric is saturated with river table juice to bond it all together. The excess cloth sticking up along the edges is easy to trim off with a sharp utility knife. The cockpit area needs a combing rim to add strength and to create a perimeter where a spray skirt may be attached. This rim is made of western red cedar strips and reinforced with fiberglass. Again, overall for this build I kept the stripping pretty simple, but I did want to do something that stepped it up a bit. I opted to book match the back deck and installed it without any staples. This is a pretty easy area to strip, and as a visible part of the kayak it makes a nice impact on the overall look. Beyond that, the client wanted a bit of artwork. Having established the basic structure with an eye towards efficiency, we can now focus on the artistic elements that would make this kayak truly special. After discussing several ideas, we settled on a marquetry bald eagle head. The eagle head is based off a photo I found online. I then adapted it to cut from veneers. I had a small collection of 16th inch thick veneers I'd cut myself over the years. The goal is to match the wood color and grain to match the feathers and beaks of the eagle. I traced the patterns onto each bit of veneer with some carbon paper and taped it in place in the growing assembly. Tilting the table and stacking adjacent pieces allows for the kerf width of the blade so the pieces fit together tightly. Scorching the pieces of veneer in hot sand allowed me to create some shading to add a bit of three-dimensionality. With the artwork all cut out and held together with tape, I traced the piece onto the back deck, centering it on the back hatch area. I scored around the perimeter of the artwork, cutting through the glass into the wood. I then used a router to recess the surface down by the thickness of the veneer. The strips on the back deck were 3/16 thick, and the recess for the veneer chewed into about 1/3 of that, leaving the back deck about 1/8 inch thick in the veneer area and very flexible. I thought of several strategies for clamping the inlay in place. What I settled on was vacuum bagging. I didn't want to distort the deck shape with the clamp and figured the vacuum would not put any pressure on the shape of the deck. In my ignorance, I reckoned that standard yellow glue would be easy and dry pretty quickly, so I buttered up the backside, lined up the inlay, installed the bagging film, and sucked it down with a pump. After the glue dried, I removed the bag and started cleaning all the tape off. Well, I was not too happy. As anyone who has worked with water-based glues and thin pieces of wood may know, humidity can cause the wood to move. The inlay was all wrinkled and lifted off in various places. I tried ironing it down. Heat will soften and reactivate PVA glue. While I got some more bits to stick down, it was still pretty awful. I tried sanding it level to see what it would look like. After burning through in a few spots, yet still having uneven areas, I decided it had to come out. A perfect example of knowing when to cut your losses and start fresh. I came up with several ideas to fix it. A, cut another piece exactly like the first and try to lay it in exactly above the failed inlay. B, make a slightly larger version. Or C, put some sort of border around it. I didn't think I'd have much luck getting a new piece to match exactly. There'd be bits showing around the edges. If I went with a slightly bigger version, because of the complex shape, it probably wouldn't hide all the old bits. As you can see, I decided to place the inlay within a shield of book-matched mahogany. This shield would hide everything behind it, so it was back to the jigsaw to cut another inlay. I do enjoy the process of cutting out the artwork, but it is frustrating to do the same thing twice. Having learned a few lessons on the first attempt, I cleaned off all the masking tape on the artwork, then did the vacuum bagging again, this time using epoxy. I placed some perforated release film over the artwork and a bit of infusion flow media as a bleeder and sucked down the vacuum again. There were some ridges of epoxy from the wrinkled film, but with a bit of scraping and sanding, the whole thing was flush and smooth. Because the back deck was so thin, and since all the sanding had introduced some non-fair areas, I decided to add 2 layers of glass over the veneer. This would stiffen up the hatch when I cut it out later, helping it maintain its shape. The thicker glass also lets me do some more aggressive fairing sanding without risk of sanding all the way through both layers of glass. I used heat to lower the resin viscosity and a bubble roller to make sure there was no air trapped between the layers. The results look good. The mahogany behind the eagle's head looked good. I even got the center line matched up with the center line of the deck. There are things I would do differently if I were to do it again, but I learned a lot of good lessons. If this were a casual hobby project, a failure like this, after all the effort of stripping up the kayak, glassing the inside and out, and all that time carefully cutting the marquetry, it could feel devastating. It's important to remember that almost every mistake is recoverable. The difference between an experienced craftsperson and a beginner isn't that the experienced person doesn't make mistakes, it's that they've learned how to fix their screw-ups. Experience provides the ability to focus on the goal and find a way to get there. With that crisis averted, I had to get on with the project. I always find this stage of the process where the deck and hull are essentially done tends to drag on. There are lots of small parts of the process that benefit from access to the interior and exterior at the same time. The combing needs completing, the hatch needs to be cut, the hatch lip installed, edging put around the hatch, and everything sealed under glass and epoxy. I strive to have no wood that is not under layer of fiberglass and epoxy. When all the bits and pieces on the interior are completed, I protect the whole insides with a bunch of coats of varnish. I've been using a water-based varnish for this because it dries quickly and while providing good protection. Finally, the deck and hull can be joined back together on the inside. After adding outer stems and a bit of sanding, the outside seam is covered with a piece of fiberglass cloth across the whole bottom. This adds protection from rocks and stiffens up the hull a bit more. As is often the case with my videos, my diligence at capturing every step of the process tapers away as I near completing the boat. This is usually due to an impending deadline. Setting up a camera and making sure the audio is being captured slows down the whole project. So while the finishing process involves several more weeks of detailed work, including sanding the epoxy, applying varnish, sanding varnish, applying more varnish, some more sanding, followed by other setting up and fitting out, all that will move past in the flash of video editing. My goal of creating a beautiful yet practical boat for my client was accomplished. I favored efficiency in construction of the basic shell of the kayak, prioritizing performance of the boat. This gave me the time to concentrate on aesthetic details where they have the most impact. Making mistakes is part of any project truly worth spending time on. If you're doing a project for your own personal satisfaction, don't let those mistakes distract you from the final goal. If you're working on a project professionally, mistakes need to be calculated into your expenses and fees. Your client or customer is paying you for your experience, which includes the mistakes you learned from in the past and the cost of you taking on new risks and expanding your skills. It doesn't take a failure as drastic as my inlay mistake to derail a project. There are partially finished projects in basements and sheds around the world that stalled out because of some minor hiccup during their making. Set yourself up for success by setting realistic goals. Then when you goof up, sit down in your moaning chair for a spell, then get back up and get back to it. I'm really pleased with how the kayak came out. While there's nothing fancy about how the wood is laid out, that's not necessary. The wood speaks for itself. It doesn't need me to do anything dazzling for it to look beautiful. The Solo microBootlegger has an elegant shape reminiscent of a classic runabout. It doesn't need ornamentation to look good. Keeping it simple works. On the day she launched it, my client held a little memorial to remember her father. With the eagle on the back deck, she decided she'd keep on paddling until she saw an eagle, and saw one within minutes. The only complaint came from her husband, who had trouble keeping up. Her dad would have approved. Thanks for watching. If you'd like to build a small boat yourself, you can find plans for the Solo microBootlegger and other designs at my website, guillemotkayaks.com. I would like to thank my Patreon supporters for the help making it possible for me to do videos like this. Until the next time, have fun building.